Gambian history before the arrival of Europeans has been preserved to some degree in oral traditions. Its history is closely tied to that of neighboring Senegal, since it was only in the late 19th century that a distinction was even made between the two countries. Until that time, the region is often referred to as Senegambia. Onto the actual history. The Malinke and Wolof kingdoms, fully established by the 19th century, were still in the formative stages when the Venetian explorer Alves Cadamosto, in the service of Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator, arrived in 1455. The Malinke were the westernmost peoples of the old Mali Empire. The Wolof probably migrated from the Songhai regions in the east, and the Fulani pastoralists were part of a migration from the Futa Toro. Although locally powerful, none of the small Gambian kingdoms were ever strong enough to dominate Senegambia. Continuing internecine warfare made it easy for the French and British to dominate the territory. The first Europeans in the Gambia River regions, the Portuguese, established trading stations in the late 1400s but abandoned them within a century. Trade possibilities in the next 2 centuries drew English, French, Dutch, Swedish, and Courlander trading companies to Western Africa. A struggle ensued throughout the 18th century for prestige in Senegambia between France and England. Although trade was minimal and no chartered company made a profit, this changed in 1816 when Captain Alexander Grant was sent to the region to re-establish a base from which the British Navy could control the slave trade. He purchased Banjul Island from the King of Combo, built barracks, laid out a town, and set up an artillery battery to control access to the river. The town, Bathurst, now Banjul, grew rapidly with the arrival of traders and workers from Gore and upriver. The Gambia was administered as a part of British West Africa from 1821 to 1843. It was a separate colony with its own governor until 1866, when control was returned to the Governor-General at Freetown, Sierra Leone, as it would remain until 1889. British domination of the riverine areas seemed assured after 1857, but the increasing importance of peanut cultivation in Senegal prompted a new imperialism. By 1880, France controlled Senegal. In the 1870s, the British attempted twice to trade the Gambia to France, but opposition at home and in the Gambia foiled these plans. Complicating matters was a series of religious conflicts called the Soninke Marabout Wars, lasting a half-century. Only one Muslim leader, Maba, emerged, who could have unified the various kingdoms, but he was killed in 1864. By 1880, the religious aspect had all but disappeared, and the conflicts were carried on by war chiefs. As a result of a conference in Paris in 1889, France ceded control of the Gambia River to Britain, and the present-day boundaries of the Gambia were drawn. In 1900, Britain imposed indirect rule on the interior or protectorate, dividing it into 35 chiefdoms, each with its own chief. The real power was concentrated in the British governor and his staff at Bathurst. Except for some trouble with slave-raiding chiefs, the Gambia enjoyed peace after its separation from Sierra Leone. Slavery was abolished throughout the protectorate in 1906. During World War II, the Gambia contributed soldiers for the Burmese campaign and was used as an air staging post. Political parties were late in developing, but by 1960 there were several demanding an independence. Britain, believing that eventually the Gambia would merge with Senegal, gave the territory revised constitutions in 1954, 1960, and 1962, and finally granted it independence within the Commonwealth in February of 1965. The Gambia became a republic on April 24th of 1970. The first president, Sir Dawda Jawara, head of the People's Progressive Party, was returned in all elections after 1972. In 1981, an attempt to overthrow the government was put down with the aid of Senegalese troops after heavy fighting in Banjul. In the aftermath, leaders of both countries created the Confederation of Senegambia. This plan called for each state to retain independence of action in most areas, but military and economic resources were to be integrated. A Senegambian executive and legislature were also established, but the Confederation was dissolved in 1989, and this was not a surprise since the Confederation was very loose. The Gambia faced serious economic problems during the early 1980s. Foreign donors began to refuse aid requests, and food and fuel shortages common in the rural areas started affecting Banjul. In 1985, the government initiated a series of austerity measures and reforms that moved the government more towards a disciplined fiscal and monetary policy. The reform program improved the Gambia's overall economic outlook, and foreign assistance once again returned. For the vast majority of peasant farmers, however, there was virtually no change in their harsh economic plight, with bad harvests and falling peanut prices continuing throughout the 1980s. Yet Jawara and the PPP easily won re-election in 1987 and 1992, although opposition parties gained some support in each election. In July of 1994, a group of young army officers led by Captain Jaya Jammeh, staged a bloodless coup, justifying it by citing the corruption and mismanagement of Jawara and his political party. The Senegalese government did not intervene as it had done in 1981, and Jawara went into exile. The military leaders promised the return of civilian rule once corruption had been eliminated, but meanwhile ruled by proclamation. Dissent was brutally repressed, and political activity was banned until August 1996. Presidential elections were held late that year, with elections for the National Assembly following in early 1997. Jammeh, now retired from the military, was elected president, and his political party, the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction, the APRC, dominated the National Assembly. A new constitution approved by voters in 1996 came into effect after the legislative elections. The return to civilian rule improved the Gambia's international reputation. Aid organizations that left after the coup began assisting the country once again. The Gambia sent peacekeeping forces into war-ravaged Liberia and worked on improving relations with Senegal, though areas along the border on the upper river remained in dispute. Eventually, though, signs of domestic discord appeared. Jammeh's rule became increasingly authoritative, and by 1998, the corruption he had pledged to eliminate was evident in his own administration. Media freedom was restricted, and an increasing number of human rights abuses were cited by international observers. Jammeh's administration was the subject of coup attempts in 2000, 2006, and 2014, which, although unsuccessful, underlined the growing discontent in the country. Still, he was re-elected in 2001 and 2006 in elections deemed generally free and fair, though with some flaws. His re-election in 2011 was denounced by the opposition, while the opinions of international organizations were mixed. The African Union, while noting some shortcomings with the electoral process and evidence of a media bias in favor of Jammeh, still found the election to be generally free and fair. The Economic Community of West African States, also known as ECOWAS, however, refused to even send a monitoring group to the election, stating that its pre-election fact-finding mission found evidence of intimidation and government control of the media, and that a free and fair election would not be possible. As human rights complaints increased in the following years, especially with regards to the treatment of journalists, political opponents, and individuals accused of engaging in homosexual behavior, Jammeh retreated from some international bodies, initiating a withdrawal from the Commonwealth in 2013 and the International Criminal Court in 2016. In late 2015, he declared the Gambia to be an Islamic republic, although the legality of this decision was called into question since he did not change the country's constitution, which stated that the Gambia was a secular republic. Jammeh cited a need to distance the country from its colonial past as a reason for the aforementioned decisions, although critics accused him of citing colonialism to draw attention away from human rights issues and the poor economic conditions in the country. The months leading up to the December 2016 election were tense. 2 opposition members died while in the custody of Gambian security forces, and at least 30 more were arrested and given prison sentences. International rights groups and other bodies cautioned that the upcoming elections would not be free or fair, and ECOWAS again refused to send a monitoring group. For the first time, however, several opposition groups rallied to support just one candidate, Adama Barrow, who agreed to serve only a 3-year transitional term. The newly united opposition posed the greatest threat to Jammeh in his 22 years of rule. A former ruling party member, Mama Kende, was the 3rd candidate in the election. Prior to the poll, Jammeh announced that post-election demonstrations would be banned. On the day of the election, internet service was cut off and international calls were blocked, adding to the already tense political climate. In a surprising turn of events, Barrow was declared the winner of the December 1st election, taking about 46% of the vote. Jammeh came in second with about 37%. Even more surprising was Jammeh's gracious concession to Barrow. He vowed not to contest the results and pledged to assist Barrow with the transition. Jammeh's acceptance of the election results did not last long, however. Less than a week after the results were released, the Electoral Commission revised the results because of a tabulation error that had been found and corrected. Barrow still had the most votes, but his margin of victory was reduced to winning 43.29%, compared to Jammeh's 39.64%. Jammeh then rejected the results and called for a new election. His actions were immediately condemned by the international community, which recognized Barrow as the winner of the election. On December 13th, the ruling party filed a petition with the Supreme Court asking for the election results to be declared void, and Jammeh continued to maintain that he would not stand down. Efforts by ECOWAS to peacefully mediate the political standoff continued into January 2017, but to no avail. Also that month, the Supreme Court said that it would not be able to hear the APRC's case until May or November, when the court, which was composed of foreign judges, would be available to meet. As the January 19th inauguration day grew nearer, both sides took action. Barrow prepared to take office, and ECOWAS assembled troops along the Gambian border, ready to act if Jammeh did not stand down at the end of his mandated term. Meanwhile, on January 17th, Jammeh declared a 3-month state of emergency, and the next day the National Assembly extended his presidential term by 3 months. On January 19th, Jammeh still refused to step down, and Barrow was sworn in as president in neighboring Senegal. Later that day, with Jammeh still refusing to hand over power to Barrow, ECOWAS troops moved across the border into the Gambia. Their advance was halted before reaching Jammeh in order to allow one last attempt by mediators to convince him to change his mind. They were successful. Jammeh agreed to step down and left the country late on January 21st. ECOWAS troops then secured the capital and other areas in preparation for Barrow's return. A few days later, the National Assembly ended the state of emergency and revoked the extension of Jammeh's term. He returned to the Gambia on January 26th of 2017 and was greeted with crowds of cheering supporters. Now back home and with Jammeh out of the country, Barrow's focus was on the daunting task of implementing the democratic reforms promised during his campaign, as well as restoring political stability and working to improve the country's economy. That December, 2 acts passed by the National Assembly support some of those goals. One established the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission, which was mandated to compile a record of the human rights abuses that occurred under Jammeh's rule and to promote healing and reconciliation. The commission would also explore reparations to victims and recommend measures to prevent future occurrences of human rights abuses. It began work in 2018. The other act created the Constitutional Review Commission, which was tasked with reviewing the current constitution from 1997 and drafting a new one. Members were appointed to the commission and began work the next year. Although Barrow announced that he would instead serve a full 5-year term, knowing that in spite of the 2016 agreement, a 5-year term was provided for under the 1997 Constitution, most of the parties in the ruling coalition agreed to support Barrow's decision, although notably the United Democratic Party did not. There were public demonstrations in favor of and against Barrow's change of heart. In December of 2019, Barrow created a new party, the National People's Party. Although with all of the both support and whatever the other word is, disagreement, Barrow still ended up winning the 2021 presidential election. And that is about it for the history of the Gambia. So now on to the fun facts. The first fact is that the Gambia is the smallest country on mainland Africa. The only countries in the continent smaller are countries like the Seychelles and Cabo Verde, which are island countries. The second fact is that if you pronounce the country Gambia, that is wrong, because the Gambia has the word "the" in the actual official name. One of 2 countries, the other one being the Bahamas. The third fact is that the Gambia shape is based entirely off of the Gambia River that goes directly through the country. The fourth fact is that the flag is based on the actual landscape, with the red being both the sun and the savanna, the blue in the middle being the Gambia River, obviously, and the green being the agriculture and the forest of the country. And the fifth fact, which I talked about, was that the Gambia was in a loose confederation with Senegal called the Senegambia Confederation. That is it for the history of the Gambia.